Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off because I think I project pretty well that y'all will be able to hear me without it. So I'm going to go ahead with this.
No, they can't use that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm turning the big mic off. Sorry. Threw me off my game. So I'm sorry you don't get to hear Sam this morning. That was what I was going to start with. He obviously is not feeling well. We certainly have our hearts and prayers with him. I was going to preach tonight. But then Martin called me or texted me and said, hey, can you move to the morning? So apparently I'm third string preaching for you this morning. And I did prepare for tonight, so it's a 45-minute lesson. So I probably should get going here pretty quickly. The lesson this morning is a continuation of the last one that I did. And I know that was March 23rd. That's been a while. So the first part of my lesson this morning is going to be kind of a review of that. And it's about Ecclesiastes. If you recall the last time I spoke, I said I love Ecclesiastes. It has bubbled to the top for me for the reasons in part that we're going to talk about this morning and that I talked about last time. Go ahead and turn in Ecclesiastes. We'll start with chapter 1. And we'll spend all of our reading time in Ecclesiastes. So I'm going to move rather quickly. But first we have to do a recap. So the last lesson that I did was to prime you, to let you know that this is what Ecclesiastes is about. The first point that I made is that it is Hebrew meditation literature. You know, so many times we come to the scriptures and we say, tell me what I can and cannot do. It's used as a law book and as a rule book, and in some cases that's appropriate, but not in all cases is that appropriate. And Ecclesiastes is one of those where it's not. It's not intended for you to go to it and say, you know, this is the rule, now do this. Sometimes it gives you a paradox. I don't say it contradicts itself, it doesn't. But it gives you two perspectives on something to make you sit with it. Intending to make you meditate upon it and ponder it and think deeply about these concepts. And that's what it means to be Hebrew meditation literature. I also mentioned that it gives you a realistic perspective, and I mentioned that in comparison to the other wisdom literature books that we have. In Proverbs, generally speaking, it says if you do the right thing, you'll live a prosperous life, you'll do well. Again, that's a general principle. And then you go over to Job, and Job, even God says there's none like him in the East. But man, he went through some really tough times. And he actually calls that out later in the book. It says the tents of the marauders are unmolested. And I think that's a King James version, and I don't know why that stuck in my mind. I don't know where King James version came from there. Well, it means, look, there are people who do bad things and they don't get what they deserve. And I'm seeing this and it seems like an injustice. And so that's kind of a pessimistic view. So Proverbs gives an optimistic view. Job gives you almost a pessimistic view. Ecclesiastes will give you both. And in a very short period of time, and I talked about that in the last lesson, and it makes you sit with it. Well, is wisdom a good thing or a bad thing? Because sometimes it sounds like it could be a bad thing. And so it gives you a realistic perspective. And this lesson is on YouTube, if the first one that I did, if you want to go back and listen to it if you haven't heard it. I also introduced you to, or I spoke of, the two characters in Ecclesiastes. So whoever wrote Ecclesiastes, we don't know. It's not specifically stated. We have speculation. He presents you with the first character, I'll say, and that's the author, and that's in verse 1:1. He presents to you the preacher. It says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. He's actually going to, then the preacher, and some of your translations will say teacher, will pick up what he says. You see it starts in verse 2. It starts with quotes. That's what the preacher has to say. And he goes on until chapter 12. And in chapter 12, verse 8, he concludes his message, and then he hands it back over to the author, who will talk a little bit about the teacher, and then he'll give you the conclusion of all the matter. And so the book of Ecclesiastes is masterfully written because the author, you have the writer, we don't know who that was, right? Then you have the author who presents to you the preacher, who is said to be the son of David, king of Jerusalem. And again, he's not specifically named, but he is set up, and this is what Hebrew literature does, as a personification of somebody with authority. Somebody who has had experiences, somebody has done these things, and he's giving you his lessons that he has learned so that you go, this is someone I need to listen to and gain wisdom from. And so that is one of the reasons why I love the book of Ecclesiastes. We talked briefly about the word hevel, and that it can have multiple meanings, and it's a very deep word. In your translations, it may say meaningless or vanity. But it has multiple meanings, like I said. So it could mean meaningless or vanity, synonyms. It could mean temporary or fleeting, because the word vanity means vapor or smoke. James talks about this in James chapter 4, verse 14. He says, your life is like a vapor. It's just here and then it's gone. And I have no doubt that he had Ecclesiastes in mind when he said that. The other possible translation or meaning of this word hevel is an enigma or a paradox. And so last lesson I talked about how as you come across that word hevel or meaningless or vanity, stop and think about which one applies. And it doesn't have to just be one. Because in some cases, the context will give you an idea that maybe it could be more than one. Something can be meaningless and fleeting at the same time. We'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll apply that to the lesson today. And then I ended my lesson last time with the different themes, and this is the slide that I presented, that Ecclesiastes gives you. It's certainly not an all-encompassing list. And I gave you this list with the promissory note that I would talk about this in my next lesson. And I'm going to talk about all these, but number 5. When I got down to it, I started to look through the themes, and I thought about trying to fit it all in one lesson. It just wasn't going to happen. I'm going to be hard-pressed to cram all but 5 into one lesson in 45 minutes. The balance of life is actually part 3 of this series, because there's so much to say about that. And so what I want to do, this is the outline for the lesson this morning. I want to cover those themes that the book of Ecclesiastes gives you. A major theme, and the preacher starts it in verse 2 of chapter 1, is the futility of life. And I try to break the 2 sub-bullets up there out into its own theme, but it's so nested perfectly in the futility of life, and you'll see that it just had to be a sub-bullet. So we'll talk about, within the futility of life, the inevitability of death and the emptiness of materialism. And then we'll move on to what I call the silver linings, because sometimes point 1, the futility of life and everything in it, can get you down. It humbles you and puts you in a place, if you let it, to go, well, what's the use? All along the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher is going to stop and give you, this is what really matters. This is where you find enjoyment in life. And I think there's a big lesson to be learned there. And then finally, kind of sprinkled, not like smack you in the face kind of comments throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, but you're taught the importance of spiritual things. But the very last 2 verses gives you the conclusion that you should have already come to, if you're a student of the book, that the spiritual things are the most important things. And that's one of the key takeaways of Ecclesiastes. Okay, so all of the verses will be on the slides this morning. We'll read some of them. I will read them to you. They're all on the slides. We'll have them on the YouTube channel. We'll also have them on Facebook, and I can give you the lesson if you'd like, if you don't want to take notes or if I go too fast for you. I'll keep them up on the slide. So first and foremost, let's talk about the futility of life. You see, our natural tendency, and I think it's a human tendency, is to think of ourselves as the center of the universe. And so the preacher, in his very introduction, intends to break down that worldview and tell you that you are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He humbles you and he puts you where you belong. Let's listen to how he tells you this, starting in verse 2 of chapter 1. We've got 15 chapters here, or 15 chapters, 15 verses. This is a preacher speaking, his introductory statement in verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does a man have in all of his work, which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. Blowing toward the south, then turning toward the north, the wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses, the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see, this is new? Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore wisdom concerning all that has been done under the heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Through verse 11, do you see how he's telling you you're a small cog in this wheel, in this life? Time will come and go without giving you a second thought. How many times do you suppose the waves have crashed on the shore just since we started this worship service? You are insignificant as to whether or not that's going to happen. And you walk away from the seashore, and it's going to happen whether you're there or not. The mountains will still be there when you've passed on from this life, just like they were here before you came into this life, and your existence does not change that mountain that's there. You're not special, and the works you do under the sun are hevel. They're insignificant, and they pass away in an instant. Now remember, this is an earthly mindset, under the sun. He speaks more about the futility of life in chapter 6. Go ahead and turn there. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. He says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, then I say, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility, and it goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place? All a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and striving after the wind. That is a very packed passage. In this passage, it falls under the multiple categories you see up there: the futility of life, the emptiness of materialism, and the inevitability of death. His point is that you can do all these things in your life, getting everything you want, but there's no guarantee that you're going to enjoy it. Look at verse 7 again. All the labor of man is for his mouth. This is New King James Version. Yet the soul is not satisfied. That word satisfied, it's not just happy, it's fulfilled. You can get all these things that you long after, money, fame, power, whatever, and you can get them, and you cannot be fulfilled by them. In fact, without God, I'm jumping ahead, but without God, you won't be fulfilled by them. We won't read it, but the preacher says a similar thing in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. He says he gave himself everything that he wanted, but the endless search of things did not satisfy. There was no profit under the sun. He denied himself no thing, but it was all meaningless at the end. Later in that chapter, in chapter 2, he talks about the futility of being a workaholic and making a bunch of money. We talked a little bit about here in chapter 6. In chapter 2, it says it goes on to the next guy. He passes away, and his money goes on to the next guy, and that guy just goes and squanders it. Meaningless, he says. And later in chapter 4, verse 8, he speaks of a man with no dependent, as we would say, I guess, in the military. No one to follow after him and inherit the money. He works so hard, and it says his eyes are never satisfied with his riches. That's the ESV's rendering. And so the preacher shows you over and over that the emptiness of materialism is a major component in the futility of life. He shows us another aspect of life that is meaningless or vanity, and that is that time and chance will happen to us all. Turn to chapter 9, one of my favorite verses, because I go back to it so many times, because when something happens to me, I wonder, did God cause it? Did God allow it? Was it chance? Some would say luck. Look at verse 11 of chapter 9. I again saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, but time and chance overtake them all. You see, you can live your life trying to be the fastest runner, the strongest warrior, or the wealthiest, most skilled person, but it guarantees you nothing because of time and chance. What do you mean by that? Well, time, because eventually the fast and strong will get old and weak, and it won't matter how fast you were. He says later in the book, chapter 11, verse 10, he says that childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. I'm a little older. I'm middle-aged. Let's just go ahead and throw that out there. I am not nearly as fast as I used to be. I'm not nearly as strong as I used to be. Injuries and life and all kinds of things, excuses. I know we all have them. I feel this one to my bones. Time is going to happen to us all. And the prime of life, childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. What about chance? He reminds you that things can happen to you that wealth can't fix, and your skills will be useless against. So strive after all those things if you want, but in the end, it won't matter. Time and chance happen to us all, and it reminds us of the futility of life. Well, not only does the preacher remind you that striving after all the things in this life is a waste of time, but he constantly reminds you that one day you're going to die. And he mentions it so many times, I couldn't leave this off, even though it's not a very happy point necessarily. I guess it can be. But the way he gives it to you is a little different. And again, you got James 4:14. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. And the writer of the preacher, right, he's going to give you some comparisons in the context of death. Chapter 2, verse 14 is the first one. Chapter 2:14, for the wise can see where they're going, but fools walk in the dark. I don't remember, that's New Living Translation. Let's go to NASB. Let me catch up here. The wise man's eyes are in his head. That's why I picked the New Living Translation. So the wise can see where they're going. Like you can see where you're going. The foolish, they're fumbling around in the dark. But look at the next sentence. Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. You're both going to die. He compares humans and animals in chapter 3, verse 18 through 21. He said, I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast ascends downward to the earth? So human or animal, every living thing will die, and you're not special. Look at one more chapter over. He's going to compare the righteous and the wicked. I'm sorry, not one more chapter. Chapter 9, verses 2 through 6. He says a very similar thing. Again, he's sprinkling all these things throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you want a theme, you got to go find them. And then read them and put them together and come to conclusion. So chapter 9, verse 2, it is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and one for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice and the man who does not offer a sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, and there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. And so God will judge the righteous and wicked, the fate of the wise man and the fool, men and beasts. It's the same. You're all going to die. I don't believe that the preacher tells you this to depress you. Because again, he kind of packages in it in a, oh, wow, I don't like that. I don't like how I feel when you say these things. I believe he's telling you these things, and this is for you to meditate upon, right? He's telling you these things to force you to maintain your perspective, to focus on the things that really matter in life under the sun. He's teaching us to do what the psalmist said in Psalm 90, verse 12, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. You know, when I was young, death felt pretty far out there. And it still feels far, but we don't know that. I may live to 90. I may live 90 more minutes. I don't know. My days are numbered. But if I keep that in perspective, it calls me to action. It calls me to act a certain way. And that's what the preacher's trying to do. He's trying to tell you to do something about it. And he does this in chapter 9, verse 10. In Ecclesiastes 9:10, it says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you're going. Another reminder of death. So it's another reminder. You're going to die one day, but this time it's not just a reminder, it's what to do about it. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. There aren't a whole lot of times that the preacher is going to give you the so what in the book of Ecclesiastes. What do you do about this? How do you react to this news? Sometimes throughout the narrative of these negative reminders, he gives you the silver lining. So now we can talk about the happier things in Ecclesiastes. You see, I believe that the preacher is trying to teach you how to live a fulfilled life. A righteous life, but a fulfilled life. So multiple times throughout this narrative, and you've seen some of these themes go from the beginning of what the preacher has to say to the end of what he has to say, and it's kind of sprinkled throughout. He does this as well. He's going to stop, and he's going to tell you what really matters. And I'm going to give them all to you right there, because it's my favorite part of the book. I think it's the best part of the book. He's telling you to enjoy life's simple pleasures. In contrast to being a workaholic and striving after the fame and the being the fastest runner or whatever it is, enjoy today. Be where your feet are. because we're so focused on goals and aspirations and trying to achieve those things. If you recall, verses 2 through 14, or 11 maybe it was, the preacher goes on a long monologue at the very beginning of the book, we read it a minute ago, that can be really depressing if you let it. He starts out talking about the way of this earth. Then he moves on to the futility of wisdom. Then the futility of pleasure and possessions. That was I denied myself nothing, I got everything. And then the futility of your labor. I mentioned that where he talks about being a workaholic. That's in the latter part of chapter 2. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. The first silver lining, comes after he runs that gambit and he leaves you with a feeling of just throwing your hands up and saying, what's the use? All this like futility, you're hitting your left, right hooks. I love verse 24 through 26. There is nothing better, that's a theme, you'll hear that a lot in Ecclesiastes. There's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good and in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. In my Bible, this is underlined in red because I love it so much. He says, there's nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. Find satisfaction not in when you get to a certain goal. Find satisfaction in your toil now. Remember, whatever your hands do, do it with all your might. And that in verse 25 here, you can only have enjoyment with God. God is the essential component. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit because that's the importance of spiritual things. Without God, you can't have the enjoyment. He has to grant you the ability to enjoy those things. One chapter over, chapter 3, verse 12. 12 through 14, I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him. We're going to come back to that verse and that phrase, fear him. Down in verse 22 of the same chapter, I have seen that nothing is better than a man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? Be happy where you are, in the labor that you toil day in and day out. In that day, be happy. In my interpretation of that, this doesn't have to be yours, but after a hard day's work, I look back on what I've done, and maybe I didn't accomplish big goals, but I made progress. And can I just sit with that and be happy with that rather than being discouraged because I haven't achieved the big goal? I feel that's in part what he's trying to say here. And that's like a key to a happy life. If you're always discouraged and always frustrated because you haven't achieved that greatness that you aspire to, you're going to be unhappy a lot until you get that. And then we'll talk about what happens when you get that. Chapter 5, verse 18 through 20. Similar vein, another silver lining. Here is what I have seen to be good and fitting. That's like saying there is nothing better. To eat and drink and enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life, there's another reminder, which God has given him, for this is his reward. I hope you're starting to see a pattern here. Verse 19, furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. You've heard that phrase as well. For he will not often consider the years of his life because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of heart. Man, to have gladness of heart. The preacher's trying to tell you how to have gladness of heart. And it's not hidden, it is in the silver linings. He says, here I have seen all to be good and fitting. Eat and drink and enjoy yourself and your labor. So enjoy life while you have it. Live your life taking pleasures in the things of this world. Eat and drink. Don't make them the main things, but enjoy them because God has given them to you. And enjoy your work on this earth. Because being satisfied with what God has given you is a gift of God. Look in chapter 6, verses 3 through 6. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he doesn't even have a proper burial, then I say, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun and never knows anything. It's better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. It's a terrible thing for a man to have 100 children and live many years if his soul, verse 3, is never satisfied. I lost my place. I'm sorry. His soul is never satisfied with good things. And so the preacher wants you to see that to be fulfilled in this life is to enjoy the simple pleasures in life. Chapter 8, verse 15, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry. When you see these patterns pop up, these phrases, there's nothing better. Here's what I have seen to be a good and fitting. That's when you take note. This is one of the preacher's points that he's trying to make you come away with. And then the last one that we'll read is chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. Go then, eat your bread in happiness, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. Verse 9, this one's underlined in red. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, there it is again, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Enjoy your food and drink, for God has already approved your works. Now there's a sense I get here. This is much study, right? This isn't like, go, do whatever you want because God has approved your works. We saw that didn't work so well for David. The sense I get here is that the phrase is that God has blessed you with certain things, specifically necessities, food and wine, as it says here. And either he approves of your works, and this is the fruit of your labor, or he approves of your ability to enjoy these things. Remember, this is the gift of God. And that some with much wealth sometimes aren't allowed to enjoy them. He goes on to tell you to enjoy your wife all the days of your life because this is your reward in which you have toiled. Notice how often he couples the command to enjoy the simple pleasures in life with a reminder that God may not give you much of it, simple pleasures or life. You will die and you won't know when. So take the time to sit back and enjoy your daily activities and the simple things in life. Well, finally, the preacher tells us that the most important thing in this life is that of a spiritual nature. The importance of spiritual things takes precedence. He rarely speaks directly, the preacher rarely speaks directly about the importance of spiritual things, but he drops hints throughout the book. And he comes in hard at the end with the conclusion, or the author does, right? The writer does with the persona of the author. He'll give you the conclusion at the end. We kind of hung around that passage in the last lesson. But those hints of the importance of spiritual things mostly come in the reminders to fear God. I've listed them all up here. The fearing God, a form of the phrase fearing God, is mentioned 7 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. I don't think there's 7 verses. I think one of them says it twice. In chapter 5, verse 7, it says, fear God. For when dreams, meaning great aspirations in your life, increase and words grow many, there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear. You see the importance of the spiritual things there. In chapter 3, verse 14, it says, I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it. And God has so worked that people will fear him. In 7:18, it says, it is good for you to grasp one thing while not letting go of the other. That's our next lesson. For the one who fears God comes out with both of them. And then in chapter 8, verse 12 through 13, it's mentioned 3 times. Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will go well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not go well for the evil person and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow because he does not fear God. The importance of spiritual things. And then at the very end of the book, chapter 12, verse 13, the conclusion when everything has been heard is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. I can't think of a book in the Bible that gives you such a concise conclusion to everything that was said in the rest of the book. And the point is the importance of the spiritual things in life. So dispersed throughout this tiny book are reminders that we should fear God, and you're intended to pick up on that along the way until he gets to the conclusion. Let's look at the preacher's words first. Let's talk about this a bit. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. We won't read it because we're kind of out of time. Let me hit some highlights here. Out of the New Living Translation, I like this one as well. Don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget your Creator. How many times have we said, well, teenagers think they're invincible? I did when I was a teenager. Probably went into my 20s. Don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget your Creator. Honor him in your youth before you grow old and say, life is not pleasant anymore. And the preacher is going to conclude in verse 8, everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. And so that's the beginning of that chapter, that verses 1 through 8, and the ending right there. And in the middle, he paints a very vivid picture. I think Sam studied it not too long ago. Feels like it might be a long while ago now. He paints a very vivid picture through analogies and metaphors on what growing old looks like. It forces you to come face to face with the fact that you're going to get old and things aren't going to work as well. And then what will you have? Well, if you've paid attention to the importance of spiritual things, you have God. Your body is broken and your mind's not working right and your eyes don't see as well and you don't hear as well. But you have God, and that's what really matters. And so when the preacher's done, he's going to hand it back to the author in verse 9. And then the author is going to speak of the wisdom of the preacher and the importance of his words. And then we'll read it again because I think it's the conclusion. It's awesome. Verse 13. The conclusion when all has been heard is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. And then there's one more reminder that he's going to give you before he drops the mic. For God will bring every act into judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. And so from the very beginning of the book, where the preacher intends to break you down and humble you, all throughout the book, he stops and builds you up by showing you what should matter most in your life. The simple pleasures in life and the importance of spiritual things. And then he concludes with the most important thing of all. Fear God and keep his commandments. The book of Ecclesiastes is masterfully written. Go ahead and get your hymnals out. Masterfully written and full of wisdom that can only be realized when you sit with it and meditate upon it. And I hope that the overview of these themes has been helpful to you. And by way of invitation, I'm going to quickly summarize what we've covered. I say quickly, in 60 seconds-ish, because the summarization of the book is in itself an invitation. So the summary of these themes that you see before you. In Jeremiah's words, God has given you life on this earth and gives you the tools you need to live it wisely and with the right perspective. The fear of God should drive everything you do. You are very small in the grand scheme of things, and your life will pass away as quickly as a vapor, so stay humble. It's easy to get caught up in seeking out much wisdom or wealth or pleasure or achievements, but even if you get it all, it doesn't guarantee that you'll live a life of fulfillment. Sometimes life is complicated and seemingly unjust and random, and at the end of it, you will die. But this realization, this fact, should not lead you to a point of despair or depression. It should lead you to an acceptance of your lot in life, whatever that looks like. That you should take each day one at a time, enjoying your labor under the sun, taking pleasure in the simple things in life, having a roof over your head, food on your table, spending time with your family, a hard day's work, and a good night's sleep. And surrounding all of this, ultimately, true meaning and purpose comes from fearing God, keeping His commandments, and living with humility and contentment, and accepting that some aspects of life remain a mystery and beyond our grasp. But without God, life truly is meaningless. If you want to fear God this morning, submitting to Him in obedience and keeping His commandments, you have the opportunity to do that now if you come while we stand and sing.